Now it's my pleasure to introduce our speaker. Jon Sopel is a graduate of the University of Southampton, completing his BSc in Politics and Sociology in 1981. He remained at the university following graduation as president of the Students' Union, during which time I had the opportunity to complain to him about some aspects of the union activity as a student. And in 1983, he joined BBC Radio Solent in Southampton as a reporter and producer. He later went on to become the chief political correspondent for BBC News 24 and spent 3 years as the BBC's Paris correspondent during the late 1990s and early 2000s. In 2005, he fronted the Politics show on BBC One, interviewing key politicians, including Prime Ministers Tony Blair and Gordon Brown, and former US Secretary of State Condoleezza Rice. He's also co-presented on the BBC News Channel and fronted a number of radio and TV programmes, including Newsnight, Hard Talk, and The Daily Politics. And prior to his current role, Jon was the main presenter on the BBC News Channel programme Global. In 2007, he was voted Political Journalist of the Year by the public affairs industry, and in 2013, he was shortlisted for National Presenter of the Year at the Royal Television Society Journalism Awards. It was in April 2014 that he was appointed as the BBC's North America editor, and it's been through his eyes that many of us in the UK have witnessed the last part of the Obama presidency, the hugely divisive presidential election campaign, and the first weeks of the Trump administration. And it's that experience which forms the subject of Jon's lecture this evening, with the title, "The Truth, the Post-Truth, and Nothing But the Truth, So Help Me God." Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming our distinguished lecturer and indeed our Pro-Chancellor, Jon Sopel.
Thank you very much. Good evening. Thank you so much for inviting me. Thank you very much for those kind words, Alex. We'll talk about your problems with the Students' Union back in 1982 after the lecture. I tell you what, doing the 10 o'clock news live from the White House is so much less intimidating than seeing a sea of faces out there. I've just got a camera to talk into. It's fine. There are 5 million people viewing, but Right, the way this evening is going to work is I'm going to rabbit on for a bit. You can ask me a whole pile of super intelligent questions that I won't know the answer to, and then we'll all go down the pub. Agreed? Good. Excellent. As Alex said, I kind of left the university and then went to work at Radio Solent. And I was a bit of a political geek then, and Radio Solent were delighted to have me because they didn't have any political geeks and they had a general election to cover. And so I spent the first kind of 2 or 3 months that I was there travelling around to different constituencies, doing a different constituency profile of all the sort of 20-odd constituencies that Radio Solent covered. And still having a little bit of a hangover from my student days, I had a CND sticker on the back of my Volkswagen Beetle. And one of the Tory candidates said to me, "How can you be impartial when you have got that in the back of your car?" And he was right. And so I took the sticker down, and since then I have never joined a political party. I won't sign petitions. I don't talk about how I vote or how I will vote, because I think that actually we are in a position of trust as journalists, and I think that trust is very important. And what's the old phrase? That trust arrives at walking pace and leaves at a gallop. And I think that's certainly true. And I think, so therefore, I've always thought that when I'm covering elections, you should be able to stand up there and people trust what you believe in. I've covered a lot of elections in the UK, France, around the world. I have never covered an election quite as challenging as the one that we have just covered in the United States. The Oxford English Dictionary's word of the year last year was post-truth. I get that. Politicians have always stretched the truth. It's a kind of slightly elastic idea, or it's like grabbing wet soap in a shower. You know, you can't quite hold on to it firmly enough. And I thought it was best summed up by Michael Gove when he kind of talked about during the Brexit campaign. I wasn't here for the Brexit campaign. I came the day after Brexit. I flew with Donald Trump to Turnberry Golf Course on the 24th of June for the maddest 36 hours I think I've spent in journalism, where we were touring his golf courses. What other candidate would take time out from a presidential campaign to go and see his golf courses? But everything about him was unorthodox. Actually, I left Newark, New Jersey, and we took off on the 23rd, and we were in the European Union. David Cameron was the Prime Minister, and the pound was rock solid against the dollar. None of those things was true when we arrived in Glasgow the next morning. So Michael Gove, during that Brexit campaign, talked about sick of experts. I mean, I had the fortune this afternoon to have had this fantastic tour of some of the facilities at the university, and I went to the kind of wind tunnel where they're, Formula One. Can you imagine the head of the Williams team saying, I'm sick of experts telling me about drag and, and how to run a car properly? I think we sort of do need experts. And that is what I think the people here have got a lot of expert. You are all experts in your own particular areas. And then we had Beppo Grilli of the Five Star Movement in Italy saying, facts, 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 I'm sick of facts. And that is the slightly challenging environment in which we operated. We had something else in the United States, which was no facts. Oh, that's me. That's boring. Right, it's dinner time. That is one of the best pizza houses in Washington, D.C. And I love it very much. It is, for those who know Washington, it's on Connecticut Avenue. It's very close to where I live. It's sort of next to a fantastic bookshop called Politics and Prose, and it's just up the road from the zoo. But this pizza house had a very, very dark secret that only got told during the election campaign. There was a paedophile ring operating from the basement of that pizza house. Not only that, but this paedophile ring was run by the pizza shop owner, by Hillary Clinton's chief of staff, John Podesta, and Hillary Clinton herself. This is a little bit of activity that took place outside the pizza restaurant after this man, 28-year-old Edgar Welch, decided he was so impressed by the pepperoni there that he drove from Salisbury, not the Salisbury in Wiltshire, but from Salisbury, North Carolina, 360 miles back if he had got back, because he'd read about the paedophile ring that was operating from the pizza restaurant in the basement where all these children were locked up and being routinely sexually abused. So he went into the pizza restaurant with an AR-15 assault rifle, which is the same weapon that was used in the Orlando killings and was used at Sandy Hook Elementary School where 20 children were killed. He fired off one round and they were able to raise the alarm before worse happened. Why had he gone there? Because he had read on the internet that that is what was going on at this restaurant. I'll just give a tiny bit of context to it. There was the whole WikiLeaks dump of information, allegedly hacked by the Russians, handed over to WikiLeaks, that had been gleaned from the Democratic Party computers. And so they went through these leaks, and they kept on hearing about this restaurant and talk of pizza, because the Democrats were going to have a fundraiser at this restaurant. So not only that, they then decide that on a very, very extreme right-wing chat room, they say pizza is code for paedophilia. There are paedophiles there because it says so. And this started on a chat room for right-wing extremists, and then some other right-wingers got hold of it, and it migrated to reddit.com, which is an aggregating site where people can just read certain bits of information. And from Reddit, a few more senior people got hold of it. That is a tweet from the man who, it's not a retweet, it's his tweet. This is the man who until 2 weeks ago was the National Security Advisor. This is from General Michael Flynn. So he was saying, from the Hillary Clinton emails, there's money laundering, there are sex crimes with children, must read. So now you have migrated into absolutely the mainstream. He had appointed as his son to be his chief of staff. And after the event, so this is after the election, that this guy, Edgar Welch, went and fired off an AR-15 assault rifle in this pizza restaurant in a quiet suburban area. So when people say fake news doesn't matter, I would argue it most certainly does matter. This is the tweet from his son after this guy, Edgar Welch, has been arrested. So we now know that there is no paedophile ring. We know that there were no children in the basement. One of the reasons we know there were no children in the basement, the pizza restaurant had no basement. So until Pizzagate, proven to be false, it'll remain a story. The left seems to forget Podesta emails and the many coincidences, i.e. the mention of pizza fundraisers, tied to it. So here we have a whole new concept of justice. I make any accusation I like to any one of you in this room, and you have got to prove it to us that you are innocent. No, justice works the other way round. The burden of proof is on the accuser. And this was a kind of area where fake news seemed to have gone completely wild. Just another story of my own experiences of covering the election. Election night I spent at Hillary Clinton campaign headquarters, and the next day I had to record what we call a piece to camera, a little stand up to, and it was a really grim grey day in New York, and I went to Times Square because I thought it would be bright, and I get in a taxi to go back to our studio to cut the piece together for the main evening news. And there's an African-American guy driving the taxi, and he's got the radio on, and it's about the election. I said, well, could you turn it up a bit? And he turns it up, and it's an earnest-sounding reporter, don't we all sound earnest, saying, Hillary Clinton is there, but the FBI getting ready to raid her properties, but she has a private jet on the runway. They have moved $1.8 billion of their private wealth to the Cayman Islands or to another Caribbean island. Meanwhile, we understand that she is heading now to Qatar, where she's going to seek political asylum because there is no extradition agreement with the United States of America, and she's leaving. Well, last time I looked, I think Hillary Clinton and Bill Clinton are still in the US of A. So I said to the driver, well, do you believe all of this stuff? He goes, oh, yeah. Well, I mean, look, there was the paedophile ring, and there was this, and that. And you think, so every falsehood feeds on another falsehood. And that is the kind of environment in which I think the 2016 election will go down as the no-truth election. Now, this is a kind of, just put that up there for a moment. You look at how people engaged on Facebook with these sort of stories. By the end of the election campaign, in the run-up, more people were reading fake news and engaging with fake news than they were actual news. That, to me, is terrifying. Because people are just reading anything that feeds their proclivities, whatever you want to call it, their tastes. And what, of course, is happening is there were bad people. I mean, apparently the Russians, and there's quite clear evidence that links some of this to Russia Today and websites that they were operating where some of this was coming out. Some of it was coming from Macedonia. Students in a town called Veles in Macedonia were pumping out fake news stories because it was clickbait. And if people clicked on the stories, they got advertising revenue, because that would generate advertising. And so there were students who were funding their education by putting out entirely fake news. There were some right-wingers here in the UK who had been involved in the British National Party who got involved as well, and there were some who just were kind of anarchists who wanted to put out fake news because they thought it was kind of fun and noisy, and they would create a fuss over the election. So, I thought we could have the sort of top of the pops music, or kind of a chart countdown music to what were the top stories during the election. So there we are. Pope Francis shocks world, endorses Donald Trump. WikiLeaks confirms Hillary sold weapons to ISIS, then drops another bombshell. I don't know whether that was a pun on selling weapons and bombshells. Anyway, it's over. Hillary's ISIS email just leaked, and it's worse than anyone could have imagined. And so it goes on. So these were the top fake news stories that came out during the election. Now, whether you believed them or not really rather depended on which side you were voting. And it wasn't just that it was only the Republicans who were subject to fake news. There was fake news going around on the other side too. And this is why I kind of think that if this is not challenged, the response of the Democratic Party at the next election is not going to be, oh my goodness, this is terrible, we mustn't do fake news. The tendency will be, look how successful it was in changing the environment and changing what people think. We'll do fake news. We'll generate tons of fake news. We'll have lies about this one and lies about that one. And that is, I think, the challenging environment in which we are now in. Now, this one here. So 64% of Republican voters still believe that Barack Obama was born in Kenya. Now, we'll come to how this myth got a certain kind of traction. But you cannot be the president of the United States if you were not born in the United States of America. This whole campaign does seem to have a bit of a racist undertone, that you are trying to delegitimize, it's a word I'll come back to, but you are trying to delegitimize America's first African-American president. And you can see that some of the other things as well that people thought were true. Oh, there we are. Pope Francis shocks the world. That was on WTO5 radio station, except there is no WTO5 radio station. That is a myth as well. So it's all presented in a way where you think, my goodness, this is for real. It must be real. Look, it says so. It's a proper name of a... And so it goes on. Oh, there we are. WikiLeaks confirms that Hillary sold weapons to ISIS. Breaking news editor. Now we come to Barack Obama. That was in 2012. That was a year after this mad hoo-ha had resulted in the president releasing his birth certificate, the White House releasing it because they thought, well, let's just get an end to this. Except it didn't end, it carried on, and Donald Trump was at the forefront of pushing the argument that he thought that Barack Obama was not born in the United States of America and therefore was not a legitimate president of the United States of America. And it went on. You know, and what do you do? How are we journalists going to report things that we believe are not substantiated? Well, you know, Donald Trump then was the head of a TV reality show. It didn't really matter what Donald Trump was saying then. I think arguably it matters a little bit more now, what he says. And so I think that you have this I mean, America has, I'm actually just written a book about, which is coming out in September in all good bookshops. There goes the plug. And just talking about how different America is to the UK and how, you know, some of the obvious things like guns and hatred of government. But there is a willingness to believe in conspiracy theories in the US that I don't think is quite here in the UK. And they've got conspiracy theories. I mean, the JFK and the second shooter, you name it, there are endless conspiracy theories. What went on at Roswell, you name it, you can find a conspiracy theory to go with it. You know, so Donald Trump is a great conspiracy theorist. The kind of normal pattern of, it's the politically dispossessed who normally believe in conspiracy theories as a way of explaining why their lives have not got better. And with Donald Trump, you know, he's got everything. Anyway, he became president on January the 20th. There was the inauguration, and there then followed the most extraordinary weekend, where I think what we'll do, I'll actually play, if it all works, my report for the evening news. So this is 2 days after, and remember, there were the crowds. You know, Donald Trump said that never had met so many people attended an inauguration as they did for this, and then he had a bit of a fight with the CIA. Anyway, well, hopefully, Well, there you can see the crowd. So that was Donald Trump's inauguration. These photos were taken at the same time, so there's no jiggery-pokery here. Taken from the Washington Monument. That was the crowd that was out for Barack Obama in January 2009.
The weightiest issues on the planet were discussed at Donald Trump's inaugural address. But what the president is in a white rage about are suggestions that the crowds for him weren't as big as they were for Barack Obama 8 years ago, even though the evidence is incontrovertible, as these two photos, each taken 45 minutes before the inauguration started, make plain.
There's about another 220,000.
But last night, journalists were summoned to the most extraordinary White House briefing to be told they were lying.
This was the largest audience to ever witness an inauguration, period. This kind of dishonesty in the media, the challenging that bringing about our nation together is making it more difficult. There's been a lot of talk in the media about the responsibility to hold Donald Trump accountable. And I'm here to tell you that it goes two ways. We're going to hold the press accountable as well.
No questions were allowed.
I will see you on Monday.
Earlier in the day from Donald Trump on a visit to CIA headquarters, a similar attack, though this time the target different.
As you know, I have a running war with the media. They are among the most dishonest human beings on earth. And they sort of made it sound like I had a feud with the intelligence community.
But hang on a minute, how do you reconcile the suggestion that it's all got up by the journalists when he tweeted this 11 days ago? He accused the intelligence services of leaking material against him and suggested their behaviour made it seem as though we were living in Nazi Germany. And today, key lieutenants were intensifying their attacks.
There's an obsession by the media to delegitimize this president. And we are not going to sit around and let it happen.
Our press secretary gave alternative facts to that.
Look, alternative facts are not facts. They're falsehoods.
Part of this maybe can be put down to Donald Trump's obsession with the size of his crowd. But there is deliberate strategy here too. It seems the White House wants to undermine the conventional media so that Donald Trump is able to present his own version of reality through Twitter and Facebook without any mediation, and say to the public, who do you believe, me or the establishment media?
Right, so that was the weekend after. I'm sure people will know the answer to this question. What was the best-selling book on Amazon in the United States the next week? Yeah, 1984, written by Orwell 68 years earlier. Can't think why. And so you've kind of got an environment of, look, we've never, the press and politicians have different jobs to do, and it's perfectly legitimate for the politicians to take exception to what we ask and the way we ask it. It's perfectly possible as well to take exception just because they don't quite like your accent. This is the news conference that Donald Trump gave, which ran over 77 minutes. And he had said that his was the biggest election victory in terms of electoral college votes since Ronald Reagan, all the way back then. And this guy, Peter Alexander from MSNBC, had this question.
You said today that you had the biggest electoral margin since Ronald Reagan with 304 or 306 electoral votes. In fact, President Obama got 365 in 2008.
Well, I'm talking about Republican.
President Obama 332
Yeah.
and George H.W. Bush 426 when he won as president. So why should Americans trust you when you're misrepresenting information?
I was just given. We had a very, very big margin.
The question is, why should Americans trust you when you accuse the information they receive of being fake when you're providing information that's not accurate?
I was given that information. I've seen that information around, but it was a very substantial victory. Do you agree with that?
You're the president.
Okay, thank you. That's a good answer. Yes.
So, what do you do? What is the correct response? We'll talk a bit in a moment about what I think are the challenges facing us. Oh, well, then I had a go.
Where are you from?
BBC.
Okay. Here's another beauty.
good line. Impartial, free and fair.
Yeah, sure.
Mr. President,
Just like CNN, right?
on the travel ban, we could banter back and forth. On the travel ban, would you accept that that was a good example of the smooth running of government?
Yeah, I do. I do.
Fine-tuned?
Let me tell you about the
Were there
travel.
any mistakes in that?
Wait. I know who you are. Just wait. Let me tell you about the travel ban. We had a very smooth rollout of the travel ban, but we had a bad court. That's the only thing that was wrong with the travel ban. You had Delta with a massive problem with their computer system at the airports. You had some people that were put out there, brought by very nice buses, and they were put out at various locations. Despite that, the only problem that we had is we had a bad court. We had a court that gave us what I consider to be, with great respect, a very bad decision. Very bad for the safety and security of our country.
Yeah, so it's kind of pertinent to be playing it today because he's just unveiled the new travel ban this evening with kind of some alterations to it. It is a challenging environment in which to be operating. Donald Trump is determined to get his message across, and you cannot overestimate the support that he has in the country, maybe not so much in the East Coast cities or the West Coast cities, but the support he has in the country. And if you're an American at the moment and you're looking and you've got money invested in the stock market, it's gone skyrocketing upwards. You wanted a more conservative voice on the Supreme Court, you're getting that. Some of the immigration concerns he has very, very wide support for. He is connecting with the American people. There is not a flight away from Donald Trump as a result of this, but he is determined to kind of make us the enemy, and if you think that's kind of exaggeration, look at that. Now, that particular phrase, enemy of the people, has a certain provenance to it. You know, Soviet Russia. If you were declared an enemy of the people, you'd get that knock on the door in the middle of the night, and you'd soon be working in a Siberian salt mine, or even worse. So that is the kind of environment that we have got with Donald Trump at the moment that we're dealing with. Now, I just want to give a bit of context for some of this. I think Donald Trump needs an enemy, full stop, in the way that he does politics. And if you look at what happened during the Republican race to win the nomination, it was lying Ted Cruz and little Marco Rubio, and then little Marco fired back with Donald Trump. Have you seen how small his hands are? It must mean something else. And it was all kind of really high, you know, Socratic debate. And you know, and poor old low energy Jeb Bush. And then he won the nomination, and he's putting his arms around all of them, and you know, we're good mates together. And then it was, of course, Hillary Clinton, and turning his fire on Hillary Clinton, crooked Hillary, and lock her up was the chant at all the rallies, lock her up. And, you know, all the crowds were shouting that as well. And then you get to the day of his inauguration, kind of which we showed on the screen there. And at the congressional lunch that traditionally takes place immediately after the inauguration, what does Donald Trump do? He calls for a standing ovation for Hillary Clinton, and what a great servant of the American people. And you kind of thought, well, you hadn't really been saying that a couple of weeks ago, had you? And, you know, so I think that he needs an enemy, and I think at the moment the Democratic Party is not that strong. So the media is the enemy. And I think that he is determined to have that kind of, that's part of what drives him. If you listen to his comments on Mexico, what we're going to do, we'll build a wall, who's going to pay for it? And everyone would shout, Mexico. And at all the rallies, it was almost like you were at a pantomime, the way that these things would unfold. So the other thing about covering President Trump is the noise. There is a lot of noise that goes with Donald Trump. He's 70 years old. I mean, that line from When Harry Met Sally, where I'll have whatever she's having. I want to have whatever he's having to have that sort of energy at 70 years old, because he is going at it, 19 hours a day with the Twitter storms, with the speeches. Everything is on camera. Everything is played out as if you are party to a reality TV show. It's the Truman Show on steroids at times that you feel you're reporting on from Washington. And what we have to do is to distinguish between the noise and what is the signal, the wood from the trees, if you like. We've got to work out what it is that he's saying that is really, really important, and what it is that you can maybe take slightly less seriously, which is a very odd and unique position to be in when you're talking about the President of the United States of America. You know, so when he tweeted, kind of memorably, that Nigel Farage should be Britain's next ambassador to Washington, I'm just having a little debate with myself whether I can tell the story that I'm about to tell. And yes, I'm going to go for it. Because I thought it was such a significant moment. I mean, it wasn't to be taken that seriously, but it was, for Britain, about to try and build a relationship with the US, to have that tweet was not exactly ideal. So I rang up the British Embassy and said, can I have a comment? And he said, way above my pay grade. You'll have to talk to Downing Street. It was 9 o'clock in the evening, so 2 o'clock in the morning in London. And I rang the duty press officer, who had to be woken from his slumbers. And I said, it's Jon Sopel here from the BBC. Donald Trump has just tweeted this. And he said, oh, he hasn't, has he? Well, yes, he has. Oh, I'm sorry, there are young people in the audience. Oh, my God, I'm the shame now. I decided on the Radio 4 bulletins to just say there was a shocked response from Downing Street. I thought that was probably a better way of putting it. But what we'd have to do there is to distinguish. I'm embarrassed now. I offer your parents an apology. What I think we need to do is to distinguish between what is really significant and what is not. And we could talk about, what has happened over the past weekend with the accusation that Barack Obama tapped his phones. Now, you cannot just dismiss that as noise. That is, Americans hold the office of president in a way that we do not hold the office of prime minister. We do not all stand up at a press conference in Britain when the prime minister walks into the room. You do, because he's the head of state in America. So the office is kind of revered. And presidents do not trash talk the previous president, even though there are, when Barack Obama succeeded George W. Bush, he had completely different policies on Iraq. When George W. Bush succeeded Bill Clinton, you didn't have that kind of talk going on. And so you have a very different set of circumstances. And actually, the trajectory, we may see evidence to prove it, and I'm genuinely saying this, that who knows, it may well come out, but I would have thought that if they wanted to prove their case, there would have been some evidence that would have been provided by now. That started as a chat show host, a conservative chat show host, opining on the fact that it was a disgrace that Obama had abused his presidential office to tap Donald Trump's phones. That was then picked up by Breitbart News, which was owned until the election run by the chief strategist, who now in the White House, Steve Bannon. Donald Trump reads it on Breitbart. 6 o'clock the next morning, bang, out come those tweets. Now, was that a lack of impulse control on the part of the president? Or was it good diversionary tactics? You look at the weekend's coverage. The weekend's coverage has not been about Jeff Sessions and what he said at his confirmation hearing and whether he told an untruth in saying he'd had no contact with the Russians. I mean, the joke in Washington is that the poor old Russian ambassador must be the most boring man on the planet because no one ever remembers meeting him. But for the next news cycles, all you're talking about is, did Obama hack his phones? I showed you those figures up there a moment ago of the extent to which people believe fake news. They do. And I'm sure that if you went to certain areas in America now and you said, what do you make of that? They said, I'm shocked and disgusted that Obama did that. He's a liar and a cheat and he shouldn't have done it. Now, at the moment, we have no evidence. But when the president does something like that, you have to take it seriously. And so diversionary tactics are something as well that is going on with this. And even if it was a lack of impulse control, there are clever people around him who will think there is an opportunity in this, that we can do it. I mean, the classic one came when, just after the election, the vice president went to see Hamilton, which is the top, kind of the hottest ticket in Broadway. He went to see the musical. The cast stood up and gave, one of the cast members very politely said, we are an inclusive society. It's a it's a tapestry, the United States of America. Let's celebrate diversity. That's all he said. And the previous day, Donald Trump had settled the claim over Trump University and paid a fine of $25 million. And that was the news cycle on Friday night. Friday night, Mike Pence goes to the theatre. By Saturday, it is all about the rudeness of the cast of Hamilton abusing the vice president. It was brilliant. I mean, it was just genius media strategy, the way in which he was able to divert attention so that, it's that kind of the three-card trick that you used to see on Oxford Street where, you're trying to follow where the cards are and the sleight of hand takes you looking in a different direction. And that is another challenge that we face. And there are times when we're just going to have to point out what we think is not correct. I mean, we have to call out an untruth. So when the president says, I got more electoral college votes than anyone since Ronald Reagan, and you realise that Barack Obama got more and George H.W. Bush got more, we have to say that. He said that there were 5 million people who voted illegally in the election. No evidence has yet been provided that that is the case. So we have to point that out. But at the same time, we mustn't allow ourselves to be painted as the opposition. Donald Trump would love us to behave like we are the opposition. We are not. My job is the same as it's always been as a journalist, which is whether I was reporting on Southampton City Council when I was a journalist at Radio Solent, or now that I'm reporting from the White House, it is hopefully to hold power to account. Do it fairly, we do it reasonably, we do it respectfully, we do it politely, we do it impartially, we do it in a balanced manner. Because I really think there is probably an attempt, and I would say a very successful attempt, to delegitimize some of what the media is doing and what it stands for. And that is a huge, huge challenge. All politicians down the ages have sought the means to be able to communicate directly to the public without being mediated by people like me. They want to cut out, and the great Depression leader of the United States, the wartime leader, Franklin Delano Roosevelt, he invented the fireside chats. And the fireside chats were that he could talk directly to the American people without mediation. Donald Trump has over 25 million Twitter followers. He does Facebook Live. They use social media extremely effectively. The more he can discredit us, the more he gets what he wants, which is to be able to talk directly. And so that's why we're branded fake news. That's why he always calls us liars, untrustworthy, fake news, make it all up, can't trust a word they say, journalists. And I've got to tell you, at the end of covering the presidential campaign, it was hostile. We had to have police round the pen where the journalists were, because we were being taking quite a lot of stick and abuse and threats from the supporters who, Donald Trump would say, right, turn around and face those are the liars, those are the people, those are the cheats. And it was a really hostile environment in which to be reporting. I want to leave plenty of time for questions. I'm going to just wanted to kind of conclude a bit by saying that throughout my career, I've kind of thought that journalism was important. I think that the stuff that war reporters do, reporting from Afghanistan or Iraq or Syria or wherever it happens to be, is terrifying. I've done a bit of it. And it is, you think, why have I put myself in a position where I've got quite a nice life and a lovely family where people are firing guns at me and shrapnel is raining down? And so the people who do it on a long-term basis, they are heroes to me. I have never thought particularly what I do is heroic, and I think compared to doctors who are saving lives, or scientists who are looking for cures for this or that, or doctors, or teachers who are kind of, enabling the next generation, I still think that what journalism does is not that important. But I have never thought that journalism, good journalism, is as important as it is today. Because I think that a democracy thrives on people who are well informed, on people who understand some of the issues that are there, the choices that need to be made. And I still think that for all that we are all citizen journalists and we can all upload videos from our smartphones and we can all, post things onto Facebook and whatever else, you need to know that what you're being told is vaguely true. And so I do think that at the moment that journalism is... people talked 20 years ago about new technology being a big threat to journalism, and they're right, but for the wrong reason. We thought that new technology, people would migrate, people wouldn't be interested in the conventional news bulletins or newspapers or factual news. What no one foresaw was the mendacity involved in fake news, and it can be because of a computer algorithm that suddenly says, you like these sort of things, so we're going to keep pumping them to you. It can be because of, kids in Macedonia producing fake news, bad people maybe in Russia producing fake news, politicians who want to create this environment of fake news, they can all be responsible for it. So therefore, that is the threat to us. And I think the opportunity that we face as well has never been greater. We have to deliver the news impartially. We have to stick to verifiable facts. If we are making judgments, let them be based on evidence. And then, hopefully, when the smoke clears from the battlefield, the journalists will still be there reporting, and hopefully you will be there reading or listening or watching what we're saying and think, I can trust what he says. Thank you very much.
I wanted to ask, do you feel that in the end, Donald Trump's real adversary will be the Republican Party? I don't know if you ever get the opportunity to talk offline with Republicans, but I imagine there are some who feel they've got a tiger by the tail. I mean, clearly there's popularity, there's a return to government, but do some of them feel that this is a very high price to pay? And, could it be in the next couple of years that actually it's the Republican Party that may be his own downfall? I just wondered whether you felt that was the case.
Yeah, it's a very good question. Me and the prediction business are not going terribly well at the moment. Alex said in the introduction that I became I was appointed the North America editor in 2014. Can you imagine what my bosses would have said if I'd walked into that interview and said, Donald Trump, the next president, And then I'd said, yes. So predictions are very hard to make when it comes to President Trump. Look, he has got the levers of power, and the powers that go with the president are immense. And it would be a brave person at this stage in the presidency that would try to make any move against him when he's so popular in the country. And also remember the whole primary process that you've got in the US for congressional elections or for Senate seats. If you were to suddenly come out and say, I think Donald Trump's got to go, it would be very easy for Donald Trump to suddenly say, right, well, I'm going to support candidate Y, who is going for this congressional seat in Pittsburgh District number 5, because I think that he or she will do a much better job for the people of Pittsburgh. And the said Republican congressman who's put his head above the parapet will very quickly find it shot off. I mean, we just don't know what the trajectory of this presidency is. I hear too much easy talk about how he's never going to last 4 years. I don't think we can have the next 4 years continuing at this kind of wild pace. But maybe it will. But there could come a critical moment where if the people that have been his bedrock support suddenly start peeling away, and there is no evidence of that yet, as I said, stock market, there's talk on jobs, but if in a year or so's time, 18 months, that stuff comes out, which is Donald Trump is not delivering on his key pledges, then you could see a situation where the Republican Party, and it will be driven by existential angst on the part of senators and congressmen and women who think, I could lose my seat because of Donald Trump. That becomes a dangerous moment for Donald Trump if it happens. But if he gets his infrastructure bill passed, which is this $1 trillion bill that he wants, then suddenly you're going to have an awful lot of people, jobs being created, kind of not unlike the New Deal, and you know the political. There are more reasons to believe that Donald Trump will succeed than will fail. There you are. And so, you know, it's possible. Who knows what might come out? There's all this smoke about Russia. So far, no concrete evidence of wrongdoing has been brought out. If that changed, that also could be a game changer. So I think I've just given you an answer which says I don't know.
Thanks for a very interesting presentation. And following on from the previous question and your answer, whether he'll lose support, I'm thinking of all his supporters in the Rust Belt and Trump saying, I'm going to bring jobs back to America. Well, technology has moved on, and I do not see coal mining jobs being reinstated in the States just because Donald Trump says, I'm going to bring jobs back. Technology has moved on. Shale gas, very successful. This could be a start of disillusionment by supporters in vast areas like that. Would you agree or comment on that?
Yeah, I mean, you're not going to see in Rochester, New York, Kodak reopening film processing plants. We don't need those anymore, and I can't see typewriter factories coming back. And a lot of the jobs that have gone in America haven't gone to people in Mexico or the Philippines, or they've gone to non-passport holding robots. So you're absolutely right. There is a lot of technological change, and it's hard to see the Ohio skyline being lit up by blast furnaces again in the way that they were when you can get so much, you know, cheaper steel from elsewhere. So those are the challenges. But, you know, if Donald Trump does get this kind of major spending on infrastructure going, there is also the politics of intimidation is being very effective at the moment. So companies that were maybe thinking of relocating outside the US, at this stage in the political cycle, they are not going anywhere near it. They're looking to see how they can invest in the US. But you've got the classic example that was from a few years ago when Obama said, you know, what about bringing iPhone manufacturing back to the US rather than doing it in China? And Steve Jobs just laughed and said that is never going to happen because we would price people out of the market. And so you are right in the sense that, you know, some of the textile industries that used to be around kind of, you know, various different parts of America, you can't see them being able to compete with the Philippines or Mexico in price for those sort of things. And so those jobs are not going to come back. But if he creates enough other jobs, and if the sense of disillusionment in America was profound at that election, they want to give Donald Trump a chance. And at the moment, I think he's got a lot of political capital still in the bank, and that is not going anywhere in a hurry. But you're right, if the Rust Belt states don't see any improvement, then it's going to be hard to win Michigan, Wisconsin, Ohio, Pennsylvania, as he did back in November.
Hi, just want to say thank you for a wonderful and very insightful talk. From your perspective, do you think this is actually the ushering in of a new form of democracy? And what do you think is the real problem here? Is it President Trump or is it actually social media?
I don't know whether it ushers in a new... for all the challenges, you've got the separation of powers between the judiciary and the executive and the legislature, so that, you know, you've got an independent judiciary which will make its own decisions, and it did over the ban. So I'm not sure that we can say yet that America has changed. Look, for a populist politician to gain traction, there has to be a certain mood in the country. My argument, I think I've been trying to make this evening, is, and it's not been so much about Donald Trump, it is about the threat that social media can pose if it is not taken seriously. And I think there is, I didn't talk about it in the lecture because I didn't think it was particularly my remit, but now that you've raised it, the challenges for people like Facebook and Twitter and others over what they put out on the air. There is a sort of, the farmer who's got a field which he lets out for a car boot sale, and he says, well, I don't know what's being sold. I'll just let the cars come in and they can sell whatever they like. But if contraband and weapons were being sold freely in that farmer's field, I think the police might take a view on it. Now, I think that social media has got a challenge over whether it kind of curates any of the content that is put on. And I know that they're thinking very, very seriously about it and recognise that there is a challenge, because I do think that democracy thrives based on people being well informed. And I wouldn't have gone into journalism had I not thought that. I mean, I'm not trying to present myself as some kind of spear carrier for democracy, but broadly I think it's the best system we've got, and it's better that people know what they're voting for. And so I do think there are very big challenges for social media, particularly because of the point I was saying earlier, that, you know, the reaction of opposition parties who've been the victims of fake news is not to say, well, this must never happen again. It's, I want to generate my own fake news about those people. So, yeah.
First from Richard, do you have any sympathies with Donald Trump? And a second question to consider from Luke on Twitter, what does the left now need to get ready for 2020?
So sympathies for Donald Trump. I mean, I think that, look, he's facing a hostile media, but, you know, I've always thought that politics, there was a great former Observer journalist called Alan Watkins, who's long since died, but he said, politics is a game played by consenting adults. And I think that's absolutely right. It's tough, it's brutal, you get a lot of attacks, but you shouldn't have gone into it if you didn't think, you know, it's not really a place for people with a thin skin. And I think if you dish it out, you've got to be able to take it. And I think that, but I think that Donald Trump, you know, he has come to the presidency and to governing. And, you know, and the system in the White House and American politics is there is not the same professional civil service that we have in the UK. You've got to appoint thousands of people. It does look like the establishment is, broadly speaking, hostile towards him. There is more leaking going on because, you know, the professional civil servant class do feel affronted by some of the things that he has said. But that's what happens in a democracy, you know. He's not the first person who has been leaked against, and he won't be the last. And of course, not all of the leaking is coming just from those people. There's a fair bit of leaking coming from within the White House as well. What does the left need to do? It needs to... I'll tell you what, when I was covering the campaign in 2016, and someone stopped me on the street and said, what does Donald Trump stand for? I'd say, well, Donald Trump, he's going to build a wall in Mexico. He's going to bring back manufacturing jobs. He's going to put on some tariffs, and he's going to stop a lot of Muslims coming in from the outside world. Now, whatever you think of what he said, the messages were absolutely clear. And if someone said to me, what does Hillary Clinton stand for? Well, yeah, that's a good question. And she didn't, so I think I think it's a real challenge for the, I mean, the question was the left. I mean, I don't know whether that's synonymous with the Democratic Party, because there is a battle going on for the soul of the Democratic Party at the moment. But, you know, would Bernie Sanders have won in last year? That's an interesting question. Personally, I think not. I don't think America was ready for a political revolution in the most capitalist country in the world. But there was definitely a movement there of people who wanted something radical change. And he was attracting, in some senses, the same people as Donald Trump, the people who think, I'm sick of Washington, I'm sick of these politicians, I want someone who's going to shake it all up. And Bernie Sanders will do that, and Donald Trump will do that, and Hillary Clinton won't. They went into the polling booths screaming for change. Now, what the Democratic Party needs to do is to work out in 2020 what is likely to be the rallying cry then.
In your whole career, you must have met with many people report on all different things, but do you ever feel threatened, or do you know that people are lying, and that you know, they may be your friends, or, you know, reporting friends, but how do you deal with people that you know are definitely not telling the truth?
Well, it's not my job to call anybody a liar. No. And I think that, you know, this goes back to what I was saying about we mustn't allow ourselves to become the opposition, because a lot of the American networks at the moment are sounding so in such high dudgeon about the way that they're being treated by Donald Trump, that they are sounding angry, they are sounding entitled. They then have discussions on their cable news channel about how unfair it is that the way that we are being treated by the president. The viewing public don't want to hear. I mean, some may want to hear about what Donald Trump has said about the media, but they're much more focused about jobs and about the, you know, all the other things that we care about. And so I think the media mustn't become too self-obsessed. I kind of think you ask the questions. And you hope that at the end of asking those questions, that people will make a judgment of whether that was truthful, what you've just heard, or not. And you ask the questions very politely and very insistently, and let people judge on the basis of what they heard. But I don't think, look, I think that it's fair to point out if there is a factual inaccuracy. And it was very interesting over the weekend. If you looked at all the American papers, whether from the left or the right, so I'm including the Wall Street Journal in this, which is owned by Rupert Murdoch, they said, President Trump accuses Barack Obama, comma, on the basis of no evidence, comma, da-da-da-da-da-da-da. And I thought this is an extraordinary moment where you've got, even in headlines, normally you don't have time for a subclause in a headline. The headline is, Obama accused of tapping Trump's phones. Trump accuses Obama, da-da-da-da-da. But every paper put in no evidence, or no evidence yet. And that was really interesting. And that is a way that maybe the media has to react in this climate.
I'm glad you brought up the point about fake news and how lots of people are consuming media that already confirms their biases a lot of the time through Facebook and things like that. Yeah. And an argument that I'm thinking, put it to you, that does impartiality sometimes come up against the truth in trying to be impartial in projecting these both sides? You go along with the narrative that a lot of the people, Trump for example, benefit from, in that you present both sides of the argument. When one of them is so clearly false, you put them on the same pedestal, kind of thing. Is that an issue that the media has to deal with, do you think?
It's a great question, and I think it is a real challenge. I mean, there were times in past reporting and recent reporting, but I'm not going to get into present controversies, but where I thought we've tried to do a false equivalence, where we say, I thought some of the reporting we did over Bosnia, for example, which is going back a long way, but where you try to say, well, they're both as bad as each other. I mean, both sides. Well, one side was kind of besieged and being pounded, and the other side was doing the pounding, and it was hard to try to present that. But I still think there is room for being balanced without kind of creating this false, so we give 30 seconds to this one and 30 seconds to that one. And, I think stopwatch journalism, so that each person gets the same side, is not great. I mean, the irony of Donald Trump, Donald Trump should have sent the cable news channels boxes of chocolates and flowers after the election. Imagine you're a TV director and you've got a bank of TV screens in your TV gallery, and they've each got a microphone waiting for someone to arrive at that microphone. And one of them you're waiting for Donald Trump to arrive at, and one of them you're waiting for Ted Cruz to arrive at, and another one Hillary Clinton to arrive at, and the other one Marco Rubio, and the other one Jeb Bush. And they all come up together, and Donald Trump is on one of those microphones. Which one are you going to pick and give endless airtime to? It was compelling. You didn't know what he was going to say next. You didn't know who he was going to pick a fight with. It was box office. He drove huge audience ratings, and that is arguably what propelled him to the nomination. I think, actually, in this country, because of the Broadcasting Act and because of the Representation of the People Act, we have a duty to be much more fair and balanced in our reporting, and hallelujah to that. Yeah.
I would like to take you outside really of the United States, particularly concentrating on the situation in the Middle East. President Obama has been conservative really in his dealing with especially ISIS and the situation in Syria. How do you see Trump dealing with that? And also the conflicts, in the Israeli-Palestine conflicts. How do you see him operating in that area? Would he take a neutral situation, or would he be siding with one side against the other? Thank you so much.
I think that what is evolving, I would say, for all the noise, and again, this is where you've got to, what I was saying in the lecture, you've got to distinguish between the signal and the noise. I think that it is fast moving towards a very similar policy towards Israel and the Palestinian question as it was under Barack Obama. It's a two-state solution. So it started off You can follow the trajectory of this. I mean, it started off with Donald Trump saying Israel should be able to build where it wants. It should move the US embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem, you know, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And that is now rowing back. It's now, we'll look at the options of moving the embassy to Jerusalem. If you look at the settlement building, they've issued a warning against further settlement building. At his news conference with Netanyahu, he said, I don't care whether it's a one-state solution or a two-state solution. I want it to be a solution that the people are happy with. They've since made it clear that they do support the two-state solution. So I think you're seeing evolving a rather more conventional policy. You heard Donald Trump saying the Iran nuclear deal was the worst deal ever made. What did he do after Iran tested America in a predictable way that it would, in the same way that North Korea has, and fired a ballistic missile test? It has imposed sanctions against Iran, but within the framework of the Iran nuclear deal. For all the talk, he hasn't undermined it. He wants to keep that in place. So there are bits of foreign policy that are much more conventional than perhaps, and the piece of political magic that he has to perform is that he has to kind of keep his base happy that he is being tough. So you'll hear a lot of tough talk on ISIS and taking the fight to ISIS, and you've seen some attacks over the past few days that American military have launched. That he will continue, probably more strenuously than maybe Barack Obama did, who, the Obama legacy on foreign policy with ISIS is he dramatically underestimated the threat and the danger that they posed and reacted very late. I mean, I flew out, the day I flew out to take up my posting in the end of August 2014 was the day that Obama said we have no strategy for dealing with Islamic State. And they had to find one when suddenly there were American hostages being put in orange jumpsuits and grotesque killings taking place. So I think that Trump will push that forward vigorously. But I think that the thing that will happen quietly is that there will be a sense of continuity in a lot of the foreign policy that he pursues.
Hi, John. Just got a couple for you here. One from Sil Forsai, who says, what is your vision of scientists and academia helping to rebuild trust in people through public engagement? And I've got one more from Wessex Scene.
I'm not sure I'm qualified to answer that one. Yeah.
And I've got one from Wessex Scene, our student magazine, who say, what do you predict that Trump will claim next?
I'm kind of the first one. I'm not in any position to offer any kind of expertise on anything, and I haven't seen enough. There are a lot. Donald Trump has covered a lot of subjects, and there are a huge number that he hasn't. So to talk about what might happen in the US on that, look, Donald Trump is a brilliant, brilliant showman, and he is brilliant at commanding attention. So, it almost doesn't matter what he claims will be the next big victory. It will be a victory. And what I don't think you'll hear is the word sorry or I screwed up. Just a guess.